Good afternoon. On behalf of the Institute on Municipal Finance and Governance, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 13th Annual Toronto City Manager's Address on Feeding Focus and Starving Distraction, focusing on priorities to deliver on Torontonians' investment. You can ask Paul about that after, that's his title. I'd also like to welcome those of you who are joining us virtually through the live stream. My name is Enid Slack, and I'm the Director of the Institute on Municipal Finance and Governance at the School of Cities here at U of T. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. First, some thank yous. I'd like to thank IMFG's external funders, Havana Capital, Maitrey, the City of Toronto, and the regions of Halton, Peel, York, and Durham. I'd like to thank our staff, Kobod Kandon-Barani. I say our new manager of programs and research, but he tells me he's not new anymore. He's been here since May. And I'd like to thank Piali Roy for helping to organize this event. And lastly, Adam Bell and his team here at Monk, who are doing all the technical stuff so ably for us. If you are posting comments on LinkedIn or other social media, and of course we encourage you to do that, our hashtag is IMFG Talks. So I mentioned this year is the 13th annual City Manager's Address for IMFG, and the third for Paul Johnson. In his first two addresses, many of you were here, you may recall that Paul talked about the New Deal with the province. This year, he will build on these discussions and reflect on the progress that has been made since that agreement. He will share more about what's been achieved, what's ahead, and how Toronto's public service is driving improved performance across the city. So my job is easy today. I'm just going to introduce our moderator. I'd like to welcome back Sabine Matheson, who will introduce Paul. Sabine has been a principal at Strategy Corp since 1998 and is the founder of Strategy Corp's Municipal Affairs Practice Group. In the past, she served as Chief of Staff to Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and that's where I first met Sabine in 1996. On the Who Does What panel. And I'm shocked by two parts of that. 1996 is like almost 30 years ago, which is a long time, so I must have been in kindergarten. And you were too, of course. But also, who does what? My gosh, we're still talking about it 30 years later and how to do it. Anyway, Sabine now serves as Strategy Corp's in-house counsel, and she's the principal author of their annual survey of city managers and CAOs. Many of you may be aware of that survey. And so she's a great choice to introduce Toronto City Manager. Over to you, Sabine. Thanks.
Good evening. You know, this evening, as is so often in the case of municipal gatherings, is really about leadership and efficiency and transparency and accountability. And, you know, talking first about efficiency, today members of the audience have a rare 2-for-1 opportunity. Today marks the second last day of International Transgender Awareness and Visibility Week. And it's also the Monk School's 13th Toronto City Manager Address, the de facto day of city manager awareness in Toronto. So in one panel, you get to celebrate both with great efficiency. And you know, if only there were an International Municipal Finance Experts Week, well, with Enid here, you'd have a notable trifecta, but sadly, such a celebration must wait for another year. But, you know, I said it was about leadership, and though we may not be able to celebrate the trifecta, we certainly can celebrate Toronto City Manager Paul and his work. As you know, he became city manager in December 2022, having worked to try and address the crisis of COVID, both here and came into that. And he arrived about a year before, so he kind of took the city by storm. And before that, he was 10 years in Hamilton. And before that, he'd worked in the development of not-for-profit housing. So somebody brought a lot of experience in both helping people and providing the services they need, but providing leadership in that regard. Paul runs a squeaky clean administration, but as many of you know, what really squeaks is Paul's basketball shoes as he goes up and down one end of the court to the other. He has been refereeing basketball since the amalgamation of the city of Toronto. So there we go again. With his poker face, Paul might well try to tell you that those skills in refereeing in contentious game time situations are utterly unrelated to the skill set necessary to be a city manager. And if he did so, his success would be just another sign of his increasingly well-known negotiator's poker face. I saw this for the first time in the briefings about the City of Toronto financial plan when I said, yes, it's a $46.5 billion shortfall in the 10-year plan, and the poker face was intact. It was next intact when he had to address provincial negotiators as he advocated for a new deal with Ontario, negotiations that resulted in a $9 billion commitment. So that's a quick look back at what he's done, a kind of previously on Game of Thrones sort of thing. But we're also here to talk about accountability and transparency, and the CIO survey was just mentioned. And I get to talk to CIOs from all over the province, and one of them, sometimes they're pretty nerdy. There's a reason I like CIOs. And I remember one of them telling me, I asked, as an icebreaker, what's your favorite TV program? And they said, Star Trek old series. And I said, this is going to take a while. Why is that? Is it because Star Trek examines forms of leadership over a 50-year period? Oh, no, Sabine. Oh, really? Why do you like Star Trek? Oh, it's the Romulans. The Romulans? Yeah, they came up with an invisibility device. They called it the cloaking device. And I said, yeah, I love all the episodes with a cloaking device. And I said, well, why is that? If you were a CAO, wouldn't you want a cloaking device? Wouldn't you want to be invisible? And this is what I think is so unique about Paul. Paul really embraces this idea of accountability and transparency. And tonight he's here to talk to us about all of these things, about leadership, about efficiency and service delivery, about accountability and transparency. So please, will you join me in welcoming Paul to the podium?
Well, thanks so much, Sabine. Sabine and I have been a pair at the last three of these, so I just say we just keep going. Now, you'll remember, for those who were here last year, we actually played a little bit as it was part 2 of the series. So we wore the same things that we wore the previous year. We agreed this year it's time for a change. New suit, new scarf, I understand, Sabine. And a bit of a new discussion for us this evening. 2 things. I'm going to be hydrating my throat throughout the evening. Saturday, Sunday, I wasn't sure I'd be able to speak, which meant that I was phoning around to the senior leadership team saying, who wants to step in? I received several resignation letters in advance of that, so I said, okay, I better work at the over-the-counter medicines, and here we are tonight in pretty good form. The second thing is, as people who know me know, I actually may spend more time thinking about the title of my address than actually at some of the content. And you may say, well, that's a bit scary, but I do spend a lot of time on the title. Not more, but a lot. For the last 2 years, I've jumped off a point and a phrase that I use often and have in leadership roles across the not-for-profit, for-profit, and now in the municipal sector. A question that I ask our teams regularly is, so what if they say yes? The idea there is be prepared. Too often we seek to get out and talk to other levels of government or talk to partners or talk to our own council or talk to our colleagues about big things, expecting that the answer, of course, will be no or much smaller than we ever imagined. And then all of a sudden things happen and someone says yes. And I always say, when someone says yes, are we ready to respond? This year, the title is Feeding Focus and Starving Distraction. Not one that I used up until about 8 or 9 years ago. Some of you may know that for about a decade now, I've been part of an organization called the National Association of Sports Officials, representing 32,000 officials across North America, everything from pickleball and professional bull riding through to basketball, football, and some of the more traditional ones that certainly I'm involved with. I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of officials, and we don't spend time, contrary to popular belief, talking about rules and the latest thing that happened in the game last week. I find more and more I'm meeting people and we're talking about leadership that transforms itself, because most of these folks do lots of other things in their life than put on a striped shirt or a gray shirt and either skate around, run around, or do something with a whistle. It's where I had a chance to meet Billy Kennedy. Billy Kennedy referees in the NBA. Last year did many of the finals games. He was on the finals crew. Billy Kennedy in 2015 announced that he was so proud to be an NBA basketball official and so proud to be a gay man. Unfortunately, he had to do that because he ejected a player who turned around and called him a derogatory comment for a gay man, because many people knew that Billy was gay, but at that time in the NBA, he had not yet come out fully publicly. I got a chance to talk to Billy about what leadership and diversity and inclusion meant in, quite frankly, a very high profile and sometimes not the most accommodating environment in the sports community. I met Bob Delaney. He's a former NBA official, but you should find him online because he was once deep undercover as a New Jersey state trooper with the mob. And for 3 years, he struggled with his persona undercover and his own life. And in fact, I went through a lot of PTSD as a result of that. Today, post his NBA career, he works with first responders, the military, and lots of other folks to talk about mental well-being and the ability of us to talk about it. He gave me a t-shirt that I wear whenever I work out at the gym. And on the back it says, "Not all wounds are visible." He wants us to be able to talk about mental health traditionally in some areas where that's hard to do. And if I think about the work that our Toronto Fire Service is doing around working with people and the fact that we have psychologists on staff with Toronto Fire, it's important that we give opportunities for people in those professions to talk openly about mental health. And it's also where I met Terry Gregson, the pride and joy of Erin, Ontario. Terry worked in the NHL for 25 years, then worked with the NHL on leadership, and he's worked with many organizations and speaks about leadership. And I asked him one time, I said, "Terry, how do you keep your performance at a high level through the long season? It starts in October, combine in September, goes through till June because you're always refereeing the Stanley Cup." And he said, "Paul, it's 4 words. Feed focus, starve distraction." And so that's where we begin tonight. Because although those are stories from sports officials, these are not people defined simply by what they've done in officiating. They are leaders in their community, they are leaders in business, they have careers, and they have other things that they've been doing to contribute to their communities and to North American life. And so that's where tonight's title comes from. And it's an interesting topic to jump off of because people sometimes say to me, "Paul, does the City of Toronto have any priorities?" Sometimes we watch and we see what happens at council. There could be 250 items of business. They're all over the map. It could be from a small variance that's required at a single property in Etobicoke through to large-scale zoning changes that change the fabric of all communities, through to funding decisions that will fundamentally change how we deliver service to the city, and everything in between. Does the city have any priorities? Or does it just jump from thing to thing to thing? I point people to the fact that the City of Toronto for some years now has said it wants to do 6 things well, and they're on the screen. 2 things are a bit more inward focused. As an organization, we seek to be financially sustainable, and we want to be a well-run city. That both impacts externally and internally, of course, because if we're pretty well-run, the services that we provide are going to be well-run as well. And then there's 4 things that we do in our community. 4 priorities that still hold up today, whether you poll Torontonians, whether you talk to Torontonians. And yes, I get it, there are all sorts of small things that at any given day are the most important thing. But if we think about where the City of Toronto is trying to put its energies and where we as the public service are trying to put our focus. It's in 4 areas around affordable housing and housing in general, keeping this city moving, which is more than transit, as I'll talk about, investing in people and neighborhoods, because despite the fact that we're all Torontonians, people live and experience life often in their neighborhoods, and we need to make sure that those amenities that are in those neighborhoods are up to what people need, but also what people demand. And then finally, the City of Toronto must, as a large city, embrace the realities of climate change and do its part to be part of that solution. From a financial sustainability part, it's a jumping off from the last couple of years. As Enid mentioned, and Sabine mentioned, finances at the City of Toronto are always a topic of conversation. The long-term financial plan that was released with lots of energy early in this term of council was meant to build on the work of other city managers at the City of Toronto. It was not the first time that the City of Toronto had contemplated looking at its financial picture and its financial future with a long-term focus. So I don't want any of what tonight is discussed to be about Paul Johnson or about this administration or this public service. This is something that has been building. But we said at that time, Toronto has both a huge challenge and also a tremendous opportunity. An opportunity to focus on a financial plan that would start to build more of the sustainability we need as Canada's largest city and as the 4th largest city in North America. And, the numbers are dire. Sabine's not wrong. When you look at the state of what Toronto's infrastructure backlog is, for instance, it can scare you. You don't get much sleep. Our Chief Financial Officer, Steve Conforti, is here tonight. I'm not sure whether he's here to check on me and make sure he audits the numbers I'm providing, or whether he's just having a night out. This is fun for a CFO. He's also probably happy he's not up trying to explain our budget and trying to listen to all the priorities people would like to see while he tries to balance what is an in and around $19 billion operating budget and an in and around $60 billion 10-year capital plan. But you know what? Steve was right there wanting to make sure that we had a plan in place. And this plan was a way over successive years for Toronto to build some more sustainability. You've heard in the last 2 years of my address about one important element of it, and that was that Toronto could not do it alone. Other orders of government are required to be co-investors and co-partners with the city that drives 20% of the country's GDP and over 50% of the province's GDP if we are to be successful. And so one of the pieces that we had to attack was that New Deal. A 3-year deal with the commitment of both parties to look at a much longer-term deal that both helped us from an operating perspective as well as a capital perspective. It was a wonderful moment of the political side of particularly the province and the city, although the federal government did come to the table and offer some key support in a couple of areas. But from the provincial and city side, it was the Premier and the Mayor saying together, regardless of political differences, regardless of where we might see the challenges and opportunities of each other's business, we need to work together better. We need to work together differently. And it allowed us to go on a path that saw our financial future in terms of successive budgets get much better. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And so then it drove a sense that we could do the other things that were important. Because the report didn't just talk about intergovernmental relations. It talked about the investment that Torontonians would need to make. And as many people remember, the property tax increases in the 2024 and 2025 budget were greater than was normally experienced in this city. Part of that was an understanding that when we looked at historical pieces, Toronto had lagged behind its GTHA colleagues in terms of other municipalities, in terms of our overall property tax rate. And I know for property taxpayers, as I am one, that's not really something you care about. But it was pointed out that if we're going to get back on track, Torontonians also needed to play their part. And then the other side was we needed to take a hard look at the way we deliver services, the way we structured ourselves, in order to make sure that we were as efficient and effective and managed budgets so that we didn't have to continue to go after funding that, quite frankly, wasn't going to be there. So some things that went our way are obviously the operating support from the Ontario-Toronto deal and the capital support that also flowed. We worked with our divisions very hard to find ways that we could deliver services more efficiently, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. It has manifested itself in many ways, and the next two slides will show you what's happening from a financial perspective. But I do want to say that a very proud moment was when the credit rating was increased to AA+, first time in almost 25 years. But what was more, I think, joyful, certainly to Steve as our CFO, and to me, and I know to the mayor and council as well, was some of the reasons behind it. Because everybody looks at the rating and goes, yeah, your rating went up a little bit. Okay, whatever. To be honest, although it helps us a little bit with borrowing rates, it's not going to change the financial fortunes of Toronto enough, just in that credit rating change. But the reasons behind it were sound financial management, the ability to be managing our large operating and capital budgets was pointed out as a key reason that that increase occurred. So this is what we've been working on. The plan for financial sustainability is working. When I talk about feeding focus and starving distraction on the financial front, it starts with how we looked at our opening operating pressures. In 2024, we started our budget process on the operating side with a pressure of $1.8 billion, about 3 times the size of anything else we had experienced in other budget years. We, of course, were lucky in that period to receive the support from the provincial and federal governments, find ways to mitigate that. Last year, the opening pressure was $1.2 billion. This year, our opening pressure is just over $1 billion, and we expect in 26 and beyond to be below the $1 billion mark. We want to get it back to the $600 or $700 million range, which is the opening pressure that, generally speaking, the City of Toronto has had to manage over its time. We have ways that we can manage that with a combination of looking at efficiencies, looking at our spending, some fees, and also the property tax. When it's at $1.8 billion, we had no options. To be honest, we actually ran through an exercise in that year, in 2023, that looked at what it would take to eliminate that $1.8 billion opening pressure if we didn't get support from other orders of government. It was a 15% reduction across every single service at the City of Toronto. That's all our emergency services, that's all our programs and neighborhoods, everything. That's what it would have taken. Thank goodness we didn't have to go there. But those are the kinds of decisions we were making. So this plan, though people say, well, geez, it's still a big number. Of course it is, because there is no way to change this and change our fortunes in 1 year. But we're working on it. From a capital perspective, this is one of the graphs that kind of made my day when Steve showed it to me for the first time. It shows that our state of good repair is flattening the curve, because one of the problems we kept identifying in successive reports about our finances, our state of good repair budget continued to go up and up and up, and the curve was not going in a flattened direction, was going pretty vertical. We said to council, we said to our staff, we have to start to change this. This is an unsustainable path. Now, we were helped. The Gardner DVP upload provided $1.9 billion, which was suddenly available for us to invest into state of good repair. So that was the good news. The second piece of good news is when the report went to council indicating the key areas like transit and housing and parks and recreation and our own capital facilities and roads and things like that, it got almost no debate. Council understood that that money should be invested in state of good repair. Not one amendment or motion to say, oh, but while we have $1.9 billion, couldn't we add a new project here? Feed focus, starve distraction. We have to deal with state of good repair. The fact that we have put a downward pressure on that curve is important to our long-term peace. Now, have we solved our state of good repair issues? Of course not. There's much more work that has to happen. But what it has allowed us to do is to put ourselves on a better track when it comes to our capital program. But here's where the public service also needs to do their part. One of the challenges in capital for us is that our spend rate had started to tail off. And in the pandemic, some of that was understandable. It was really tough sometimes to execute on large projects. Supply chains were disrupted, so on and so on. However, we had slipped a bit. Can't use the pandemic as the excuse for all things that are not going well. We had slipped a bit as a public service. And so the finance team, myself, the senior leadership team said, we have to do better. And I'm pleased to say that our capital spend rate is up to almost back to its historic high of about 75%. Our goal is probably to get to 80 or a little over 80%. The reality is we'll never probably spend 100% of the capital pieces on a year-by-year basis for a variety of reasons that Steve can talk about to you with afterwards. But we were down in the 60s. We were down in the low 60s at one point. So our capital spend rate is up because you can put all the money you want towards state of good repair. If you actually aren't doing the work, then we have a problem. Now we'll get to what the work in our community means from a congestion and neighborhood dynamic in just a second. So no good deed comes unpunished, as they say. And the reality of capital spending is that that has an impact on the community. But let's focus on the good news, okay? The good news is that we've been doing some strong work in our capital side. The other piece we've been doing in terms of our financial work is to talk to every single division and the sections within divisions about focusing in on being a well-run city, delivering our services in the best possible way. We have a wickedly talented public service, as does every municipality that I know of. The one I used to work in Hamilton, I hear from my colleagues who are here, both past and present, members of senior leadership teams or CAOs in municipalities, they talk about this all the time. But there's always a need to refocus our energies. And we've been asking all of our areas to focus in on how they deliver their services. Sometimes that is doing more with the same. That is finding ways that we can provide a better service with the same resources. Sometimes it's about finding new resources. So we've been instituting a much stronger focus on continuous improvement, reviews. You can't get out of this. We are a always getting better organization, and there is no escape. We actually have reviews that we've gone to council to talk about the areas that we're going to look at. And then, of course, I encourage everybody to just not wait for that day when your division turns up in a council report. Why don't you start that work today and talk to us about the ways you're improving? I know our head of Toronto, our IT area is here. Sonia's somewhere in the crowd. There she is over there, hiding. Sonia has done an incredible job of embracing the spirit of continuous improvement. Sonia's team, in meeting some of their benchmarks around service, and much of that's an internal service, right? If we don't have technology services driving what we do at the City of Toronto, pretty soon you're going to feel an impact of that. So it's a lot of internal customers. She was at about 65%, wanted to get it higher than that, get it up to at least 85% of meeting the standard of the responses that she should be doing. Well, you know what the old chestnut is. If you want more, here's the number of staff people and the budget I need to make it happen. And then Steve says, here's our budget realities. Sorry, we can't accommodate. Well, Sonia didn't go that route. Sonia asked her team to think about it in different ways. They found ways to improve their systems, their processes, so that they are now meeting those targets without needing new FTEs, without needing new funding. And as I always say, sometimes the fact that we didn't end up saving money is okay because the avoidance of money is just as good. But we went further in technology. I asked Sonia, and Sonia was already on it, but I asked her to just go as deep as she could to figure out how we could extract every bit of savings in technology in an organization that is massive, has a ton of people and a ton of technology. It starts with licenses for software. Think of the millions a place like the City of Toronto would spend on that. And then think about whether we know for a fact that every single person needs those licenses, that every single person is using those licenses. And of course, as you can well imagine, the answer was no. Over $14 million saved by doing some right sizing of who has the licenses, who needs the licenses, and consolidating that work so that each group didn't go out and use their licenses independently, because we can do bulk purchasing. Why would you have a group of 300 people and then 500 people and even 1,000 people doing it separately when we can combine that together for 2,000 or 3,000 people and get a much better deal? So the savings started to come in time and time again. We got rid of, finally, this is a bit embarrassing, but I love the story. 550 fax lines are now cut off at the City of Toronto. There may be somebody out there in the world that is right now tweeting at whatever the hashtag is, and saying, but I like to communicate with the City of Toronto via fax. The reality is you're the one person, so that's too bad, and post away, it's not coming back. But it is an example of where, when the scouring begins, it just continues. It is contagious. And there's a list of things that Sonia and her team in technology services has done to be more efficient, to save money, to not have to come in with a budget increase. And those are the types of things that continuous improvement drives. Kate Basil is here tonight, and she is our Deputy City Manager for Community and Emergency Services. Between her and David Jollymore, our Deputy City Manager of Corporate Services, they were handed the challenge of improving our ferry operations. Many of you have read about the purchase of new ferry boats, whatever that's coming. They're also handling that, doing a wonderful job. But in between, one of the things that I got yelled at by more than a few councillors was the poor service that people had taking trips back and forth to the ferry. And there is like 1.5 million trips. So this isn't a cottage industry. This is a big-time movement of people. Really important from a tourism perspective and, of course, from a resident perspective for those who live on the island. So what did this group do? They dug into every reason that we were providing poor service and found ways to change it with very little new investment. By having our ferries moved into our fleet division, and by the way, when you hand fleet division a new piece of fleet equipment, they go crazy. They love it. Also found out that our old ferries run Cummins engines, which also run in a bunch of our other fleet vehicles. So they're like, look, it's the same bloody engine. It's just buried in a boat as opposed to put in the front of a truck. So they're able to do that. We had a much better usage of our relief vessel. The relief vessel had a lot of downtime in the past. The relief vessel was up. I think it had about 96, 97% uptime during the season. What that allowed us to do was at peak times, make sure we had an extra vessel on. What does that do? Two things. You stand in line less in the blazing hot sun of the summer. But the second piece was that previous years, we had boats at 95% capacity, 10% of the time they were going back and forth to the center island. That is a jammed boat and doesn't feel very good. We got that down to 2.4% by having that relief vessel there. Better customer experience, less anxiety, lots of kids going too. If you're in a crushed capacity on a boat with a small child, you're not feeling the love from the City of Toronto. So it's those pieces that we continue to look at. We have integrated, finally, parks into 311. I got to tell you, when I took on the role of the city manager, a counselor came in and goes, I got to talk to you about 311. And I thought they were going to talk to me about the whole system, how it's integrated, you know, the time we take to answer calls, all that. They had one thing. They said, I don't understand why parks are not part of the 311 system. And I actually turned and went, what do you mean? And they said, Paul, you can't log a service request for parks through 311. Now, I have a poker face. Sabine's right. Occasionally, I slip. And I said, you're joking. And the counselor looked at me and said, I'm not. So we go on a path to integrate 311 in parks. It's now operational. The team has done a great job of accelerating that work. It was on target to be done not by now. It's now up and operational. The fact that we have this integrated with our 311 system, which is quite robust, can always be improved, but is robust, is now meaning that we have better data and we have better responses to our parks service requests, which is important. And it goes beyond that, because we know from a 311 perspective, the biggest problem really isn't the way you get to 311, it's what happens once that service request is in. We have this saying, it's called close the loop. And essentially what that means is 311 takes a service request, it's about a pothole, goes to transportation services, they're supposed to deal with the service request, fix the pothole, and you get a response back that says your call has been closed. We have a service standard in terms of number of days. Sometimes we meet that, sometimes we don't, but you at least understand it's done. What was our number one complaint? Oh, I got an email that the thing's done. I'm staring out my front door and that hole is still in the road. So either you're lying to me intentionally or your system stinks. I guess the good news is we were not lying intentionally. The bad news is that our system stunk. I'll tell you, we actually don't have a common definition of close the loop. We're fixing that. And more often than not, what was happening is it was being closed because it might go to the wrong section, and when they sent it to the correct section, it actually closed the ticket out. Well, from a user perspective, I don't care. The city's internal machinations are your problem, Paul Johnson, not mine. And so we get into this whole, well, technically we closed our part of it and this and that, and the answer is no more. I'd love to say today it's perfect, it isn't, but it's better. 311 now no longer has a period where we do not accept calls during major snow events, allowing people to call in and say, hey, my street hasn't been plowed. Now sometimes people call in about 5 minutes after the snow starts, expecting that the plow's coming down. So we're not going to close that loop in 5 minutes. But what it does, and what I could never understand about that closeout period, was its intelligence that we can use. Heat mapping that we're getting 17 calls from one street 12 hours into the storm saying there hasn't been a plow that's come down this street yet is an indication that we then need to send that to the supervisors who talk to the contractors who get the equipment out, and we do something about it. Hearing about that call 2 days later really doesn't help. So when I talk about improvements, these are the things that we're working on each and every day. When it comes to housing, I couldn't be prouder of the work we're doing to improve the way we're actioning our priority on housing. Here's some numbers. But one of the stories that some of you have heard me tell is that I was hired by Mayor Tory and the council of that time, as you all know. And one of the priorities that we had talked about was development review and the fact that it was taking a long time for us to approve any application for housing. We did have a bit of a pilot for affordable housing that was working to some degree, but it still wasn't great. And he looked me in the eye and he said, I'm on my third city manager who I'm asking to fix development review timing. And so I jokingly said, because I thought, I got a good rapport with the mayor. I said, and you don't want to be on your fourth. And I smiled, and he turned to me in only the way that he could, and he said to me, but I will. So it struck me that, okay, enough joking, let's get on it. So we pulled together the team, and we actually did one of these larger restructurings that the City of Toronto has gone through, probably since it's moved from a commissioner structure to deputy city manager structure in the city. We completely reorganized how planning is interacting with the development review side of things. We hired new leaders, including a leader that is now responsible for development review and nothing else. We brought together the teams that have to chime in with all the pieces that are required to approve applications, and we are doing a much, much better job. In fact, we've reduced our review times by 80%. Now, I have to give some credit to the province of Ontario. Their passing of legislation that put some very tough constraints, in fact, penalties on taking too long with certain application timing, helped get our attention. When you're going to lose money, it tends to focus the mind. So we got to starve a few distractions by the fact that we were going to lose money. Focus, focus, focus. But that wasn't it all. We had to change the way we were working. Now, a lot of people said to me, you have sealed your fate and you will be out as the city manager before you even start, because you're tinkering with things that work the way they work, that aren't going to get better, and you're diminishing the role of planning and all the rest. And nothing was further from the truth. Today, what we have is we have our planning department and our chief planner who is focused clearly on the policy direction for planning for the City of Toronto. And that's where that time needs to be spent. Greg Lintern and I were in far too many meetings talking about whether a 12.5 meter setback or a 12.2 meter setback would satisfy some rule. And I said, really, Greg? Should you not be thinking about bigger issues? But development review sucks that time out of you, right? 40,000 applications last year. It's a time you have to put in. So really pleased with that. Now, somebody will say in this audience, but I've heard from a developer that they still have an application that's 5 or 6 years and it still hasn't been approved. The reality is our backlog is still a challenge. And so the team this year has focused on clearing that backlog, because that 80% reduction kicked in January 1st of 2024. It has held through this whole time. But for some of those older applications, they were far too long. They remain, some of them, stuck. And it's unacceptable, and it's being fixed. But what's interesting also about the change in that is it's not just about faster time. It's also been about better customer service. Time and time again, we receive letters from lawyers that were working for developers or developers themselves saying, not only am I more satisfied with your timeliness, thank you, I also feel that you are working with us as partners, that you are understanding our business, and we appreciate the increased level of customer service. I couldn't be pleased with both of those realities. We have unlocked housing, we have built housing by being creative. Our housing team was challenged by the mayor to find a way to unlock development under our new public builder model. We actually sat down with key people in the development industry to talk about purpose-built rental. So we wanted to move forward on some projects, and we knew that the financing just didn't work. It didn't pencil, as they say. So we got around the table and we listened to what they wanted from us. Free land, fantastic. No development charges at all, and no property taxes at all. And also no constraints, so no affordability targets. So we listened, oh, okay, I see. And somebody said, what's the public benefit to that? Okay. So we then had a different conversation, which said we understand the penciling problem, and we are prepared to work at what financial models we could look at to help unlock that financial dilemma. But, as staff, we were sitting there shaking our heads, and certainly the mayor had said for us that there is no possible way this was simply going to be about a shift of public investment to just allow construction to happen in its own way, that the public benefit was about affordability. And so we structured a program which has been successful, which I think is a model that other orders of government should be looking at. It was to eliminate development charges, and Steve and his team found a way that we could maneuver our capital program, not diminish it in any way over the 10 years, but maneuver enough money that we could be investing between that and a 15% reduction in property taxes, that we could find around $350 or so million to invest on top of our already very strong incentive package for building housing. And we received applications that on average were in the 24 to 25% affordable range, and we are breaking ground on those. And the latest report, as you've seen in the media, suggests that Toronto is responsible right now in the last 8 months, is responsible for 65% of the development that's occurring in the city. The problem is it's nowhere near at the scale we need. It's about 7,500 units. It's wonderful. And each day I think about the generational change that will mean for people that can move into those houses. But I weep at the fact that we actually had 33,000 units apply for that fund. We just don't have the resources. This is where the opportunity intergovernmentally lies. Somehow, some way, this type of program can be replicated with investments by other orders of government. the piece that we've been pitching more so than just make us whole by just cutting a check to the municipality for the development charges that we would waive, which really isn't a big winner, I understand, for the provincial and federal government to come and cut a check to the municipality. But we're asking for a look at how do we swap infrastructure projects that are funded through our DCs and then turn that DC into an incentive program to build housing. And think about some of the big infrastructure in Toronto. One of the things that I learned along the way as I've been talking to our staff about our financial picture is that in Toronto, 42% of our development charges go towards transit projects. Just so we're clear, the next largest municipality is Ottawa, going through a transit piece as well at 30%. The average in the GTA area is about 11%, and if you take the province as a whole, it's 15%. So there, right in there, is a delta that is unique to Toronto because of our transit needs, which are not going to go away. So how can we work provincially and federally, because both of them want to build transit too, to say how can you swap out these projects that are getting DC funds that allow us the flexibility to invest those DC funds to help us build that housing? We're prepared to think about the 15% property tax reduction. You want to know why we picked 15%? It's because that's the amount that goes to service our capital program. The 85% is about the day-to-day services, which we will not ever tap into as long as I have a recommendation in my mouth, because those are the day-to-day services, and we start to chip away at those, we're in trouble. Just think about some of the US cities that use their powers to waive property taxes and their inability to deliver core services. So we're finding creative ways to, and we've shown that it can work. So how do we work together? And essentially we're saying to the provincial and federal governments, who are listening, by the way, and are trying to figure out some ways. And I'm so thrilled that, Martha, you're here this evening from Municipal Affairs and Housing, my colleague at Provincial Ministry. But we're having good meetings and open and honest conversations about the same challenge we all face. We know right now construction is a problem. But I'll tell you the last thing that I talk about when it's all this housing stuff and what we're doing. Of course, we focus on the housing units and the impact that has on people looking for housing, particularly people looking for housing affordability in Toronto. But you know right now what this also is? It's about protecting jobs. The construction industry at the moment is going through a massive negative situation when it comes to keeping people employed. So every time we're investing in this, we're keeping those jobs going. Things will come back. You know, all we know about economics is it's cyclical. It will come back at some point, but right now we need that help. When it comes to keeping Toronto moving, we are doing a number of things. The biggest that you see each and every day is the construction and transit, which is a huge tip of the cap to our provincial partners in particular, and more the federal partners who have come on board with their initial foray into transit funding that's long-term through the Permanent Transit Fund, which helped us to finally get new subway cars on Line 2. It's no longer historically significant. We're going to have new cars on those in the coming future. We're about to open it as a museum. Now we can actually do it. And you know, the operational stuff, all joking aside, the scary proposition of how you keep those old cars going as we go 4 or 5 years out, and the fact that we can't provide good service because they're not compatible with automatic train control and all that stuff, really demanded that we got there. So we got there, feds, province, and the city. And as you probably read in the media, we took the collective decision between 3 levels of government and the TTC to single source this. It is staying in Canada, primarily in Ontario through Alstom. And the Canadian content, we've been working with them. You know, single source means that we can work with you a bit on your terms. And we're going to get as much Canadian content in that as well. But the other thing is that all this infrastructure stuff, whether it's the Gardiner, whether it's bridges, whether it's roads, whether it's transit, all has an impact on the community. And so we know that you know, we need to make sure that we are cognizant of your experience on the roads. So some of what I'm also really excited about is that we have been looking at congestion. And yes, congestion will start to get solved with much better transit, because when you can provide a really strong opportunity in transit, people will actually make different choices. So we'll get there, but that's some years away. But we're also looking at how we can make sure we keep people moving. Of course, the greatest example of that is the Gardiner Expressway. where 18 months early, it's reopened, the section that we had closed down to 2 lanes in each direction, now back open 3 lanes in each direction, and everybody's excited about it. We did that with a variety of different things. The contractor, very innovative, they found that they could produce larger prefab sections of roadway to put into place when they tore the old sections down, so that was good, that sped us up. 24-hour construction, those types of things. But what was more appealing to me, because let's be honest, the Gardiner also got done faster because the province came along and invested close to $70 million to help move that along. We can't always do that. So what I said to our team is, how are we using those lessons and doing it in every place? And the answer is we are. Today we're using it in the Richmond Street ramp, which everybody that uses a DVP, I know, it's a pain. It has to be done. But it's going to be 4 months shorter than originally planned because we're using all the same techniques we used in the Gardiner. So that 4 months is 4 months less of troubles. Even on our small projects on streets, we're using the mantra that we need to get in and get out on time, if not a little bit early. And we've been doing that. Even at King and Church, where we had all those problems when we uncovered subsurface infrastructure that we didn't anticipate, had to close the intersection in different ways earlier than we thought, we, at the end of the day, completed that project on time. So while we had challenges and while we had to pivot a bit in our operational realities for transit and other things, the reality is that the major construction finished on time. And for Will Johnston, our Deputy City Manager of Infrastructure Services, he said to me, Paul, I want faster, I want smarter, and I want construction that is less impactful on the community. So it starts with our construction methodology, which is now built into our procurement package. We actually procure with incentives built in that we've gone through, so we don't have to invent it every time. The other piece is that we're coordinating our work more so than ever before. We have a strategic capital coordination office, which is a fancy way of saying everybody get your butt to the table because we're going to talk about what we're all doing. It's hard because not everybody works for the City of Toronto. Metrolinx is a provincial entity. Some of the private utilities are like, well, we don't really care what your problems are. We're going to get in there and do our work with private utilities. But what we're doing is encouraging all of this to happen in a way that is better coordinated. There is a bit of truth to the old joke that we'll come in on Tuesday and rip up the road for a sewer for 3 weeks, and then once we patch it up, 2 days later, we'll come in and rip it up for a hydro line, and then after that, we'll rip it up for a water line, and it goes on and on and on. So we're trying to avoid that as best we can. Again, a work in progress, but we actually have a dedicated team for it. And this is a theme that comes through our work at the city all the time, is when we have people that get up every day with the charge to make these things happen, then we are better at what we do. When we do this as an ad hoc, then we're not as good as we can be. We learned this in a hard way with winter services. We don't have a winter services team that exists all year round. They do other things. And some of that was, well, why would we have people thinking about snow in the middle of the summer and heat alerts? But the reality is, if you don't have a small team analyzing what went well and what needs to change, and then of course we grow the big team once we get into the winter time, you never really make all those improvements that we need to make. Unfortunately, it took a rather bad incident in February and a review that we had to undertake to wake us up to some of the changes that we need to make. But we're making those. And now it's a much more coordinated effort. We actually have people that think about this year-round. We actually have found ways to have an all-of-city approach. Why were we letting transportation services wear everything when we have trucks and people in other divisions and departments that can come and help? We have a transit stop that's got a big pile of snow in it. Why don't we send out a small bobcat and a truck from Parks and get that thing cleaned? Why do we fight and wait and take days to figure out how to do it through a contractor when we have the ability to help out? That's what Torontonians want. We invest in people on a daily basis. That's our parks, our recreation facilities. It's the work that goes on in community. It's the safety that we provide and try to provide as best we can in communities in a variety of ways. It is the fact that I'm so proud that we have a non-police response to mental health crisis that covers the entire city. Any neighborhood in Toronto can make that call to 211, but also through 911 and receive a non-police response if the incident meets that threshold. And what I tell people about the Toronto Community Crisis Service that I think matters to me is that we spent the time to work with the police dispatch to build their confidence, to go through the triaging that needs to take place. I don't think too many people understand the liability that public safety call answerers have in terms of their responsibility. They can't just decide, it sounds like I should send it here or here. There's a liability to what they do. And so we had to build the confidence, and we worked with the Gerstein Center, we worked with our own staff to build the confidence so those calls could be directly referred to a non-police service. It allows the police to handle more of the calls they need to. And this is not a massive percentage of calls for Toronto Police, but it's enough that it can start to make a bit of a difference. So all of these things that we do, we try and do in a better and better way. It's why we've tried to take a different approach to looking at issues of safety on the TTC. The good news is the really violent incidents on TTC and in the city in general are way down. But the problem is the sense of safety is still a problem, whether it's in transit, whether it's in our communities, whether we're dealing with encampments or everything else. And so we're trying to build the teams to better address that. Not many people realize that we have, in the last year, had over 2,200 people move on from encampments into safe shelter or into housing. A lot of people think we're not doing anything. You know, I hear it all the time. The city has decided it's okay to sleep in parks and on the right-of-way. And the answer to that is we haven't. We have balanced, however, what is a way of looking at people and trying to provide help versus simply move on. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But last year, we had about 500 encampments. We're down to about 340. That will continue to drop. We are working with people each and every day in encampments because we know that some of these parks are now places that people can enjoy in their communities, and we know how important that is. So all of these things that we continue to do are things that we need to continue to work on. The final one I want to touch on for a second is climate change. And you know what's interesting is that this whole deal about climate change even was at our very last council. So this is breaking stuff that made it into the deck on the weekend because council passed more investments and more opportunities for Torontonians to access subsidies for the very things that help with flooding. But the other piece about flooding is that we have done some of the big things as well. In Toronto Water, we have projects that are taking 8-10 years that are going to change the dynamic of basement flooding and lessen that impact, but that takes time. So we have these subsidy programs in the interim. And then the other piece is we've done things like the Port Flood Protection Program, which is unlocking housing potential down on our waterfront. The reality is this $1.5 billion project that is pretty cool about redirecting the Don River and doing all the work and the flood protection and everything else. It's really cool from an engineering perspective. We plugged the river, we flooded the river, all the native species. That's great. But what's really important about all that work that you can't see now because it's really under the water is that this is unlocking housing and employment opportunities that would not have been there. We could not build in an area that was going to repeatedly flood. And now we can, helping to build out the waterfront and the 100,000 people that we expect to be there. So those are the kinds of initiatives that, yeah, they take a long time, but I'll tell you, the innovation and the work of the public service continues to drive them forward. You know, I started with Terry Gregson. I'm going to end with Mark Twain. I don't know what that says about who I hang out with and who I read, but whatever. I like this quote because a lot of you will be sitting there and online, and you're probably putting out those comments right now to say you're cherry picking all the good things. Why I'm telling you about some of the positive steps we've taken that have come out of our need to change our service is to say this is a mindset. And I'm going to end by telling you that we are not done. This presentation does not conclude with, please applaud your Toronto Public Service because we've nailed it. This concludes with, delayed perfection is not our goal, because it's unachievable. Continuous improvement is the way that we work each and every day. We know, and you have told us, Torontonians tell us in the polls we do, people tell us in community meetings, our council tells us as they work with their constituents, that we have work to do. But I hope today I've been able to illustrate how when we focus and we remain focused on our key priorities, we starve out some of the distractions that can pull us off message and pull us off work, and we put the right resources in place, we can actually get better. And not only get better by a bit, in some cases, we can get better by a lot. I am blessed each and every day to work with some incredibly talented public servants. I love listening to them. Half the time they share their work with me, and I have no idea about half of what they're talking about because it's not my area of expertise. But the passion that they speak about it with is what tells me that we are a public service that's listening. We are a public service that's always trying to get better. We are a public service that if you continue to give us the trust and confidence, we'll continue to deliver on the investments that you all are making and many others in Toronto are making as well. Thank you so much.
Paul, there's a lot there that's like a mixture of, passion and determination, and but where you ended was that there's a lot more to do, and you started off with the expression feed focus. Well, give us a sense of what you think might be ahead. Are there a couple of things that you want to feed next? Like, what are you cooking on the focus department? Is there a couple of things that you're particularly excited about that you think will be in the next?
So internally, leaving aside our priorities that continue to be our driving force, internally the discussion we're having is around operational excellence. And that is that we want every division, every section within those divisions to really look hard at making sure they have those fundamental building blocks of operational excellence. It doesn't please me to tell you that at times we're missing standard operating procedures for certain work, that we don't have, for instance, common definitions of things, that we still have this very vertical sense of our organization and not a horizontal sense. So we're really focusing on that. Some of you will know that in my time, I've added, because of restructuring, 2 deputy city managers to our senior ranks. That is not without its barbs that come my way, because that is building people who don't actually deliver frontline service, of course, and their senior positions. But part of the charge of the deputy city managers is to be very focused on the horizontal of our organization. They are not senior division heads. They are there to make sure that those connections are happening. And here's a story I'll tell. So a few years ago, the community, rightly, I think coming out of COVID, said, you know what, Toronto opens up the park washrooms and the water fountains way too late in the year. Our service target was to get it done by the end of June. People are like, geez, we've already had 8 heat alerts by the end of June. What's going on? So lots of consternation about that, and charge from the mayor and council, we got to do better. Great, we go away, we figure it out, we plan it out, and we structuralize it, because I don't want to do it one year well. It's got to be done every year. And what came back from the deputy city manager at the time was interesting. He said, do you know, Paul, that opening up those fountains and park washrooms, 40% of the work is actually owned in parks. 60% of it relies on other parts of our organization. So if you want to understand why horizontal is important as vertical, there was it right in my face. Something as easy as turning on water, you think would be a fairly straightforward, who's the person in charge? Well, there's many people that have to do it. We now don't hear that story. We're open a boat as early as you can get, given the frost lines that exist in this community. But it's an example of what we're doing from an operational perspective. The second piece is we have to figure out a way in these next couple of years to get through the financial turmoil we're in. At my last check, we were at about 65 million in development charges for the year for Toronto. We average, anywhere between 350 and 500 million, depending on the year. We've had years where it's been as high as 700 million. We can handle that for a year or two. We build our DC projects, and our DC reserves will do that, but it can't go on for long. We're also getting hit with less land transfer tax. We're getting hit with all those things about the economy. And we're also being challenged by Torontonians who are feeling the pinch of affordability. So the focus has to be on delivering a very lean organization, but at the same time, not using the old chestnut of, well, we'll just cut out a bunch of services or pull back on services. I think people want to see us delivering on the things that they want in their communities and need in their communities. So those are a couple of areas.
Right. And, you know, there are a lot of old chestnuts, but every now and again you get a new one falling on you from the province, too. And, I mean, I think a lot of us are probably very heartened by the idea that there has been so much that's positive that's gone on in the bilateral negotiations with the province, and I know Deputy Martha's been a part of that. But then at the same time, every now and again, there's the odd chestnut that's rattling around in the gutter as it's fallen down on your roof. And I'm just wondering, if you were going to starve distraction provincial style, are there any distractions you would just as soon be starved of coming your way from Queen's Park that you think would really be material to helping the city thrive?
Sure. You know, there are things that happen from a legislative perspective that distract us. I mean, we'll just use automatic speed enforcement. Whatever you think of it, I'm not going to go there. We can have a debate of that for a long time. But just the energy and the work in an organization of having that happen so fast, leave aside the decision, the speed at which it occurs. You know, there's a machine that has to keep these things going, right? Grass doesn't cut itself in our parks. Snow doesn't remove itself, except when it gets really warm. But you know what? It doesn't remove itself. We need people to do it. Well, it's the same with automatic speed enforcement. It also didn't just go to line our pockets to do fancy capital works here, there, and everywhere. It had real impact. It funds our school crossing guard program. And so in November, as we are trying to land the pencil on the staff recommended budget to the mayor for her consideration as she works towards her budget that she'll deliver to council, we now have to figure that out. It pays for 18 police officers at a time where I'm not sure we want to be talking about going to the police and saying, well, I'm sorry about your fortunes, we're going to pull back on policing, when we still need those folks out doing traffic enforcement. And so all of those things, the distraction is that with such a short window, we have to do so much work that takes us away from something else. Say over the next year this is going to happen, we can plan it out. You always have to leave that 10 or 20%, right, for the things that come from council. They do the same thing to us, by the way. And, you know, but these speedy things. And then there's just some that, we wish we could have a bit more conversation about. And I think some of the building standards pieces are ones that I don't know that it distracts us in terms of our work. We just don't do some of those things, but I'm not convinced the development community will suddenly be energized because they don't have to do green roofs anymore. I think that it's much more fundamental. So talking about how we work together to support development during this period of time is a conversation that we should be having in a detail wise. Doing it on the fringes is what is a distraction to what the core issues are, which are much more fundamental than some of those things. So that's on the provincial side. But I'll also say that we continue to talk with our council and the federal government as well about how do we continue to focus on those things we want to work on together. So, I've given you a few examples. Everybody's going to, out me to the province, and I'll get an angry phone call, I'm sure, from somebody, but nothing they haven't heard from us and from other municipalities. But I want to add the other piece in, Sabine, which I think is important from my perspective, is I don't think people understand the work that has to happen to change what is a fairly easy policy discussion. We're doing it, we're not doing it, we're expanding it, we're contracting it. It has an operational impact that I'm not sure people understand the impact that has on our organization.
So this could be my last question. So start thinking about the questions that you might want to ask. Paul, I was really struck by the quotes that you gave at the start from your various refereeing friends. And the other one that you mentioned was not all wounds are visible. And you have a really remarkable point of view on the culture of the organization that you have to lead. And I'm just curious, when you think about it and you see it up close and you try to lead it and you bring a lot of principled leadership to it, are there wounds that you're trying to manage that help bring this organization to be the best that it can be right now. What's your take on the culture? Because they often say culture eats strategy for breakfast, which we of course find very alarming at Strategy Corp. What culture are you working on to deal with wounds? Are there any?
Yeah, it's tough to be in public service these days. It's becoming even tougher. More and more we're drawn in as not part of an operation that can have its moments that needs to be fixed, and we're all for that. You shouldn't get into public service. That's what I always say to new officials. This isn't for you if you don't want to get yelled at by anybody. But you shouldn't be chased to your car. You shouldn't be called terrible names, whether you're in the NBA or in Little League basketball or baseball on a Saturday afternoon. There is a line. And public servants shouldn't get into this business if they don't want criticism. And so you have to realize that. But I think today the level of that criticism and the pointedness and everything to do with the way that information can get out, it's wonderful in one sense because it allows many more voices to be there. It's not so great in other senses because it allows many more voices to be there. So we have struggles. There aren't a lot of people that are looking at senior leadership roles in our organization with a lot of fondness. Despite the increased pay, despite the ability to build your resume, they also see what you have to endure. And for many, they're saying, I'm not sure I want that. And that's hard. So on the one hand, everybody would say, Paul, yeah, build an organization of continuous improvement and trying to do better and all the rest. You know what's going to happen is we're not always going to get it right. We will make mistakes. We try not to make mistakes that are catastrophic, but we'll make mistakes. The problem is there any room for those mistakes to be moments of learning? They don't have to go by benignly. They can be raised as concerns. But is it an opportunity for us to get better, or is it an opportunity for us to say, who will pay? Right? Question I get asked all the time. So who's going to be fired over what just happened over here? My answer is always the same, the head of the administration. So if you want to come after somebody, come after me. Wow, Paul, yeah, but it's somebody else. Like who? We heard somebody say about this, say about this. You're not going to get a different answer from me. If you want to fire somebody, fire the head of the administration. But the problem is we shouldn't even be having that kind of conversation. As I just described to you, there is very little that happens in our organization that is the accountability and responsibility of one position. It's shared. When we don't do well, yes, there are people that perhaps have more of a role in that, and we need to work with them and all the rest, but it's rarely an individual or an individual division. So the more that folks like this and the people that are engaged in cities can remind people that you need a motivated, talented public service. You really do. Yes, we need an absolutely spot-on leadership from an elected official perspective as well, but it's a partnership. You know, I will forever remember those 10 weeks in late 2023 when politically between the province and the mayor and her team and the bureaucracy of several deputy ministers, including Martha, and ourselves with a few of the key senior leaders in Toronto, we worked together to find solutions for Toronto. And believe you me, the politics behind it was always going on. And if you looked at the term sheet that the bureaucrats came up with at one stage, the whole New Deal is not exactly what we had on the table. That's all good. We understood that this was going to go through those, but it was a back and forth. And that's the way this thing has to work. And right now, it feels oftentimes that the folks that are doing a lot of the work, that we want to be innovative, we want to take appropriate risk, are feeling just very shy to do some of that. And when I talk to my colleagues, when you do your surveys at Strategy Corps, you hear the same thing.
That was a great answer. So we got time for quick questions. So I've got a microphone here that's going to come, and I see the person in the front row here, sitting in my chair.
Took over. Paul, I'm going to ask you a tough question. I hope that's okay. You come across, and I believe as a caring, compassionate leader, someone who really cares about our staff, cares about growth and capacity building and making sure our city is resourced. So my question is, as a city manager and as that leader that everyone looks up to, how do you elevate the discourse at City Hall so it's focused on data, on actual evidence, instead of politics?
Great question. Quick answer.
So the short answer is we're spending a bunch of time saying, that partnership of the professional staff and the political side, we need to keep that. We consult all the time with our elected officials to understand stuff, but at some point we have to go into our world and we have to produce on our information. Their job then is to accept, defeat, amend. I mean, they've got other options of deferral and referral and all that kind of stuff, but they get a chance. At times, I worry that we've got some public servants that want to make the report end up looking like what a few councillors wanted it to be. And my answer to them always is, what's your advice? You're the professional. And again, don't take from that I always want to be in the face of our elected officials. This is a partnership. But at some point, we need to say, here is our best advice. Now you go at it. So to your point of how do you elevate that, I think the stronger our information that we're passing on, and we do that through our reports, and they're in many different forms, that's how we continue to elevate that discussion to say, here's the evidence, here's what we have as professionals in this world, and then it's over to you as our governing body to have at her in the way you do. And what I will say is that working now for 15 years in municipalities across 2 municipalities, for the most part, when we do it that way, there is a strong respect for the understanding of the public service. We have to make sure we don't blur those lines too much, because that's when we get ourselves into a bit of trouble.
And next question. Please. On the aisle in the middle.
As residents, we watch council, we see motions passed, and often supported by the mayor and not supported by the mayor, but council makes decisions. But for the resident who has a problem, small problem, big problem, their only recourse is to go to their ward councillor. Mm-hmm. And then she or he either takes it to council as a member's motion or says, sorry, I'm not willing to. So really what happens with members' motions, which really represent residents' aspirations, issues, problems, and so on, what happens with those? Because they're all directed to you as a city manager.
Yeah.
You get a lot of them. You get 20 to 30 of them every council meeting.
Oh, that's a low month, so that's good. Yeah, I'd love it to be 20 or 30. No, you're right. So what happens with those is that I don't work on all of them, as you can imagine. They come to me, and then we distribute those to the appropriate divisions to work on. They all have a tracking. So the reality is when they appear, they become, if they passed, it's no longer the member's motion, although that's how it gets on the docket. Once it's approved, this is council's direction. And I think some people, they say, well, this was Councillor X or Mayor Chow's, issue. Once it's passed by council, it's a council-related piece. So we're working on behalf of all of council when that happens. And that's why I remind folks that, we need to make sure this occurs, because at least 14 members of council have decided that this is where they want to go. And oftentimes it's much more than that. More and more, we're also trying to encourage ways that we can work with residents before it has to get to a member motion. We just had a great example where a group of residents came forward. They had issues with the way that some public space and some new development was happening. And so rather than go through that route, we offered to get staff on the ground and see whether we could work through some of the challenges together. And we are finding that is a helpful way too. So there's much more work that's happening in that way, which I think is good. And it's actually resident driven, not always councillor driven. But yeah, when it becomes a motion at council, it's the same direction as if it's a report we've been working on for 12 months. There is no difference in terms of its weight on the administration. But what I will say is, how we have to sometimes work with them is on occasion, it's, they will say to me, oh, do you need a member's motion on that? I say, can we just work on this before we get crazy with this? It's again, that starving distraction a bit. If we're going to put in something like that, it may take a whole bunch more work. if we can work on it in a different way, we may be able to solve this faster and with a little less of that formal process. So sometimes I do try and manage that, as does the rest of our senior team. But that's how that system works. And it's also a really important historical piece, as our city clerk will remind us, of making sure that every member of council has a voice. So regardless of whether you're a committee chair or vice chair, you have that sort of power, or whether you're on certain committees, you always have the ability to bring a member's motion forward. And it's the way our local democracy is strengthened in our committee structure model.
Okay, one last one, super quick. Got to be a short one. Look at that, I believe you've tucked them into submission, Paul.
I have the ability to do that.
Well, I thought it was great, honestly. Anybody over here? All right, now I have a request to ask then. Would everybody who works on Paul's team at the City of Toronto please stand up, be quick about it? I'm going to ask everybody else to please thank Paul, but Paul would want us to also thank these folks because, as Paul has said, it's all about team. So can you please have a big hand for Paul?
Wow, I can see why you didn't have any questions. There was just so much information in this session. I want to thank Paul and Sabine for a great discussion today. Paul, I heard you on the radio before 8 o'clock this morning on CBC's Metro Morning. And that was live, and I know your day isn't ending right now either. So I really appreciate you being here. It was, as I've said last year, a tour de force. I know when I read your title out, Feeding Focus and Starving Distraction, there were a few chuckles in the audience, but I think you explained pretty clearly what you meant by feeding focus and starving distraction. And I really appreciate your candor, talking about all the things you're doing, but all the things that still need to be done and what isn't working. So that was great. Sabine, we keep bringing you back because you do such a great job of making the whole session run smoothly. Thank you so much for your introduction and your questions. Tonight's event was live streamed, as you know, and it had also been recorded. So the recording will be available on our website and our YouTube channel in about a week or 10 days. And that ends this session. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.